Welcome, everyone. Call to order our City Council work session for first day of March 2022. The one topic for today is development standard housing choices. Julia, Joy, who wants to take over?
Joy is going to be the presenter this evening. So, and then Erica will be joining as well, but it sounds like her laptop decided it wanted to update 1 minute before the meeting. So she's waiting for it to finish and she'll be joining. There she is, she's coming. So, but Joy will be presenting the meeting.
Great.
Excellent. All right, so let me actually share my screen with you guys. And can you guys see that fully?
Yep.
Okay, excellent. Well, good evening, Mayor Mason, Councilors, Joy Chang, Senior Planner with the Planning Department. This is actually the first time I'm in front of you this year, so Happy New Year, even though it's March.
Happy New Year.
So just a little bit of background. So tonight we'll be discussing the second phase of the Sherwood Housing Choices Project. As a reminder that this is a two-phase project. The first phase was the residential building design standards, and that was processed and approved by council in late 2021. As a reminder, the residential building standards address entry location and orientation, garage and off-street parking areas, windows and doors, detailed design, and of course, implementation through clear and objective process as far as residential design checklists. So we are now on our second phase of the project, and it is to amend our development code to include new housing types. And these housing types are triplexes, quadplexes, and cottage cluster housing. We already have some middle housing choices in place already, like duplex and townhomes that have been codified. So we're only touching base on the new ones that have not been codified. In addition to that, we found that we needed a transportation system plan amendment that's tied to this, to the housing choices. So we'll discuss that further. I also want to remind that our planning commission was acting as the advisory committee for this project, and we've been, of course, working diligently in the implementation of the residential design standards and housing choices ever since December of 2020. We've had like 17 planning commission work sessions tied to those topics. And of course, tonight I want to acknowledge Jean Simpson, the chair for the planning commission. She's in attendance tonight, and I'm sure she'll be able to answer any questions you might have tied to the planning commission work that has been completed on this project so far. So again, to note, the housing choices development standards proposed are typically the minimum required by the state. Some of the amendments have been taken from the model code that staff determined to make sense, like cottage clusters and driveway access to plexus. So let's continue on. The first type of housing choices we're going to discuss tonight is triplex and quadplexes. We're proposing minimum standards as required by the OAR. And again, as noted, some access also from the model code. The development standards for triplex and quads are reflected on this slide in regards to minimum lot areas. But I want to also clarify, because there was a question as far as where do these apply? And I do want to let you know that plexes are allowed in all residential zones that are allowed for detached single family dwellings. So anywhere detached single family dwellings are allowed, these housing choices would also be allowed. Minimum lot width, depth, and setbacks are consistent with the current single family zone. And again, the minimum lot areas are reflected on this slide and consistent with the OAR and minimum standards for the base zone. Let's see. So this table, again, establishes, the House bill establishes maximum requirements for middle housing.
So
develop-
Joey, would you do a quick favor and go back one slide? real
Yeah.
quick?
Yeah,
So to be clear, for a quadplex, it has, if it's not 7,000 square feet, there's no chance of them being able to do a quad on on something under 7.
that is correct.
So in a new housing project, if they were to come in as, and they're all 5,000 square foot lots, then quads are no longer a viable option.
Right, that is correct.
Thanks.
All right. So again, these are the parking requirements, and they are very specific from the OAR versus the model code. And we've just reflected them as mandated by the OAR.
Joy, can I ask a question on that?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. So am I reading this right, that we only have for like a triplex, they only have to have on a 2 spaces in some instances for parking?
Right. It depends on the lot area of the site, determines as far as how many spaces.
So this, because typically we've been, it's the general rule of thumb is 1 space per unit. Because they're now saying there's going to be a unit there that doesn't have a parking spot. Is that correct?
But it's important to know, so yes, but it's important to know that the minimum lot sizes in new development in Sherwood is 5,000 square feet. So line number whatever and whatever can be ignored on the triplex, and you look at lot area equal to or greater than 5,000 square feet would be in new development.
Understand. So on the quadplex, then there could be a situation where it's 3,000 or three parking spots for 4 units.
So again, quadplex. So this, not to be critical, but I'm being critical in a similar way, different way of Tim, and I apologize. We just saw in a quadplex, you can't build a quadplex on a lot smaller than 4,000 square feet. You can't build a triplex on a lot less than 5,000 square feet. So why do we have lines?
Is that a discrepancy in the Division 46 code?
I think it was just taking exactly out of the code, the OAR, not, so Joy, is that something that we even need to have in the code if it's not applicable?
Yeah, we could definitely remove it.
I think that the way to think of it is that the 2 sections of code stand alone, right? So in theory, at some time in the future, potentially the minimum lot sizes could change, in which case these lines would then become applicable potentially. I'm not saying they ever will. I'm not saying they ever should. I'm saying they potentially could. And so this is just meant to cover the entirety of all lot sizes, regardless of whether those lot sizes could exist due to different parts of the code.
Yeah, I mean, it's a direct copy of the language from the OAR.
So, I mean, not to get too far in the weeds here, is it 3 for like the quadplex, the second line under quadplex, is it 3,000 to 499 or 4,999? Because it's, if you were exactly 5,000 square feet, you'd sit in, I'm just curious where
It says
Is
less
equal
than
to or
and then the
greater
next
than?
one
Greater
says
than, I'm
equal to
sorry.
or greater than.
yeah, I just saw numbers. I like numbers.
Other questions, or should we move on? Okay. The next 4 slides are going to address unique design consideration, such as the number and location of driveways and the orientation of the front entrances. To comply with the legislation, the standards relate to the size and location of the structure rather than the amount of units. Since the proposed standards are largely taken from the model code, we definitely have some flexibility in regards to these standards because the OAR did not address driveway approaches, but the model code did. And so we definitely considered them as important because they would create clear and objective standards that are in place. Council can definitely give us direction, go towards a different direction. But I can definitely go through these 3 driveway approaches, and then we can address on how council would like to move forward. The model code basically identified that the driveway approaches can have a total driveway approaches can't exceed over 32 feet per frontage, as measured at the property line. So like the example A, it's all those driveways must not exceed 32 feet per frontage. And if the driveway approach may be separated when located on a local street. So if they are separated because their frontage is a local street, they must meet the applicable driveway spacing standards for local streets. So that's one requirement that the model code identified as far as the separation and the maximum of 32 feet per frontage. The second is the driveway approach that if it has on lots or parcels with frontages only on a local street may either have 2 driveways, like reflected on A in this image, or, and again, those 2 driveways approach can't also exceed the 32 feet in frontage. But they can also have one maximum 16-foot wide driveway approach, which is reflected on B, where B, the driveway is definitely shared, and that's the 116-foot wide driveway.
So
Yes.
nothing's going to be quick, unfortunately. Back up one slide. So this talks about local streets. This talks about local streets. Can or should do we currently, so do we have language to protect the potential for on-street parking spacing? Is that allowed in the glorious, and I'm of course being very funny, state law that we're having to abide by? Can we mandate that that there is 20-foot sections for on-street parking if there is by chance room on the road for parking on street?
So currently the way that we've drafted the language hasn't got that approach yet. But
so that's not I don't care about what we've got drafted now. I care about what we're allowed to do or not do. This train wreck of a state law that we have to abide by.
Right. And like since this is from the model code, there is definitely flexibility that we can add that provision and move that forward. So let me just get through the next two.
So real quick on that, Joy. I mean, when this was at Planning Commission, Chair Simpson, I made the same request, and I believe it was supported by most of the commissioners, that those spaces in between the different driveways need to allow enough space for a car to be parked. Did that not get folded into this?
I truly did. I am remembering this conversation, but both Erica and I looked at the amended text, both at the one that was passed that was tied to the residential designs and the ones that are proposed currently, and we did not find it. So I don't know if it.
Well, who wrote it?
Well, it would have been staff.
Right. So
I'm letting you know that we
need to work on it.
Okay.
We'll need to include it.
Yeah.
So, and just I'll chime in here, and we did
logic to do it. Yeah.
We did talk a little bit about this this afternoon too, and I think that if we get direction from council, which it sounds like we will get, we can work on this before the hearing with the planning commission next week. And also obviously explore with DLCD and make sure there isn't something that we're missing. But, we do think that we could, again, clear and objective, require, certain distances between driveways, or at least some distances between driveways to maximize that. We're going to have to be careful because the math has to work where we're not making it impossible to actually do the driveways, or they're going to call foul. But yeah, we can definitely.
It has to be optimized, whatever optimizing.
Yeah.
So similarly, in whatever scenario that it might have been looked at yet, we have some sort of impervious surface requirement in our design.
For the yardway, for the yard?
For the front yard.
Yeah, we did that in the design standards.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's making me question that and does 8 foot first point is 8 feet the right width for a driveway, for a single car driveway? I don't know the answer. I don't recall the last time I've driven on a single car driveway.
8 feet is the maximum width of a trailer or a vehicle on a highway. So that seems pretty narrow for a driveway in my book. But,
and then the pivot on that is, if it's narrow, every homeowner is going to turn around and widen the damn thing after they move in, unless, most likely.
neighbors or something.
But what is it, the conversation about the percentage of impervious surface in the front, and make sure it all works? I would think it should be a 9-foot driveway at a minimum. And a sidewalk from the main entrance of these units to a walkway from the main entrance of these units to the sidewalk, might not be realistic with impervious requirements. I don't know.
Well, definitely staff will reevaluate this in regards to optimizing on-street parking. And we will definitely bring that forward to the Planning Commission.
Great. Thank you.
Just as a point of comparison, a standard size single garage door is 8 feet. I'm sorry, 9 feet. 9 feet wide. So it would be weird to have a door that's 9 feet wide and a driveway that's 8 feet wide. I've never seen a garage like that.
Yeah. If I could just add to, I think at some point, this is a much wider issue for me. I mean, the standards for the approaches for the driveway obviously play an important part when we talk about parking on the streets, but it's across the board. I know you're going to get to it later, but this 28-foot width requirement that's coming out of DLCD that we're looking at too. When you start looking at TVFNR, when you start looking at fire hydrant placement and street light placement, Julia's seen it, but we have a neighborhood that's just going in over here with 13 homes. And because of all those things, there's only 4 places you can park a car in the whole for 13 homes. So I think it's something we need to look at holistically in terms of all of our code around transportation and street design to make sure that we're optimizing, to use the mayor's words, for parking on those streets.
I definitely fully agree. So I have a slide so we can discuss that further.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right.
I'm sorry, I just want to get on my soapbox for a second.
That's okay. So we already went through this as far as there's some options as far as grouping them together or having single ones as long as they're both local street. The other is also a standard that basically says that a lot or parcel must access the street with the lowest classification, meaning that if it's especially on a corner lot, if it's a local street and the other street is a collector or arterial, it would require the access point at the lowest classification, and that's really a no-brainer.
Okay, so let's give not a what if or whatever, just
So-
that statement. So you have a 50 by 100 lot. The 50 width, or 40 by 110 or something like that, but it's narrow and wide. The narrow width, oh hell, do 70 by do 70 by 100, and the 70 is on the local street and the 100 is on an arterial or on a collector. They just have no choice. They have to make it work and meet all of our design standards, despite it might be a much better project if they could dump on the other street, right? Even if it costs them a unit, even if they could only build 3 when they would really like to build 4, but because they're accessing, they have to access the local street. It's just the way it is, right?
That is the way that it's currently written, that, again, we can make modifications.
No, I'm good with that.
I wouldn't want to
Well,
change
and
that.
that's
No,
part of
no,
the
I'm
current
just-
code standards too anyways, right? I mean, that's generally, it's, as a general rule, you're gonna.
That is
access.
correct, Julia.
All right.
No, the last thing we need is people backing in and out of spots on a major road.
Right.
Mhm.
We've got enough of that already.
Right, and so, also the last point in regards to this, in regards to frontages only on collectors, or arterials, they still need to meet the applicable driveway access standards for safety. And we have that existing within the code as far as those, standards.
It's a
Joy,
driveway access
sorry.
standard on the collector. Just plead my ignorance for a moment. I can't think of it off the top of my head.
Yeah, I don't have the specific access spacing requirements for collectors or arterials at this time.
It's gonna require them to be spaced further apart. That's the general concept.
Yeah. From,
Presumably, they would probably have to use a single access point for the whole lot if they're on a collector or arterial.
Most likely. Yeah.
typically,
Gotcha. Good.
Joy, I want to make sure that we had good direction on the driveway. If you could go back to that 32-foot lot, because as staff is going to be one more, I think. Yeah,
this one,
with that one. Yeah. So I think the intent of not exceeding 32 feet along the frontage is so that you don't have a sea of asphalt or concrete along the frontage, even if you have a quadplex or a triplex. So, but what I'm hearing from council is a desire to have maybe wider driveways. And so I just want to make sure that we're getting clear direction so that when we're proposing something, we know the direction that you guys want to go. I know you want to maximize the on-street parking, and so some dimensions and spacing to do that. But I guess I want to get a sense of your thoughts or input on that 32-foot maximum, any direction or leaning on that, so that if we're
So
proposing.
back to our different code we've already adopted, we have a requirement of impervious surface. So what is the percentage of the front yard that has to be impervious surface? Remember, so that partially, impacts things. But it has to be a functional driveway. So if we say, and it's got to, am I right that a triplex or a quadplex, if we tell them the driveway has to be 10 feet wide, then
I think we need to start with what's the standard width of a driveway, right?
Yeah.
Like if it's 8 feet, fine. That seems unlikely to me. To me, I think the mayor's onto something, right? To me, it's about percentage of the overall lot width, right? If you have a 40-foot wide lot, and you try to put 4 driveways on it, you'll be in compliance with the 32 feet, but that's absurd. It's going to just be all asphalt. I think it goes back to like a 50% ratio or something. So if your front lot line is whatever it is, your driveway surfaces shouldn't be able to exceed 50% of that. I'm just picking a number out of the air, but it feels like a number that's in line with somewhat close to what we talked about with the front yard stuff.
Yeah, and so
And
PC can, great.
those
PC
could
can
match.
go on it. I mean, since we only got an hour for this thing and we're halfway through it.
Well, I'm going to just add a little bit more. I think we also have to look at it from the parking on the street point of view. If you have a 7,000 square foot lot, it's conceivable you may only have 70 or 75 feet of frontage. And in that particular case, in this particular diagram, it's going to be, 8-10 feet in between each spot. A driveway that you can't park
Right.
in 10 feet. So, making sure that, if the driveways were, if the second and the fourth one were swapped, now you have parking on the street. So again, it gets back to optimizing what's a standard parking spot looks like and make sure that we're
Okay.
I think too, the other thing that we need to know is what are our parameters that we have to work with within the OR, the statutes.
There are none regarding driveways and driveway approaches. So this is
Okay.
this is really to protect the community from
Right.
sea of asphalt or whatever.
Right,
So
right.
that's where we want your
So
input.
then I think we can really craft something. I think we need to take it offline because we'll spend 2 hours on it. But I think we can really craft something that gets to the intent of it, think what we're talking about here.
Yeah, rule number one, they need to protect the impervious surface thing requirement. And then go, let planning commission chew on it. So
Yeah,
Okay.
this is helpful. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
I suspect a lot of combined driveways.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's see here. Oh, okay, and then one of the other proposals was that if they are abutting an alley, the access has to be taken from the alley. And we are proposing some transportation systems plan amendment to basically adopt public alley design cross-section detail. And just as
Are alleys required in this new law?
no, they are not. But alleys are already allowed within our existing code. And we just have
Maybe we
notified
want alleys to continue to
cross-section.
be in the code. So question for planning commission, do we want alleys to continue to be in the code?
Okay, that is
Next.
definitely something that we can ask them, and we can definitely remove it.
But if we do.
But I think that's a separate issue.
Yeah, so,
Regardless of
right.
whether that changes or not, this just says, if there's an alley, you have to come off the alley, which to me is logical and makes sense, and I wouldn't want to remove it. If we want to
Right.
remove alleys, fine, we can remove alleys, but that doesn't affect this piece of code.
Right. Yep. Very good point. So in our code, do we have an alley standard? And that's what you're saying, we need an alley standard if we're going to have alleys?
Yes, we actually, the transportation system plan does not have a cross-section detail for a public alley. And we're fixing that so that, when someone wants to build an alley, we actually can refer to that cross-section.
Yes, a standard would be good.
All right,
Light poles from the street would be good. So not some funky, ugly light pole.
all right, so I've kind of heard two things in regards to the alley. Do you want us to talk to the planning commission if we want to remove it from triplex and quads?
I'm fine with them asking the question. I haven't thought about it. I was under the assumption that it was a requirement under this horrible Oregon law.
No, it's not. So we can ask the planning commission for direction. All right, so then moving forward.
For direction on whether we remove alleys from our code?
No, remove alleys from triplex and quadplex standards.
That makes no sense to me. Like that, like
The-
if we have an alley, why would we want to remove this page? That makes, there's no logic to it.
I think the mayor's request was, do we even want to have alleys in our transportation plan?
Which is fine, but that's
Yeah.
outside the scope of this project.
Exactly. But
Okay.
I think the mayor asked that we take the question of alleys back to the planning commission. the overall, the
I
question.
think
whether
that's part of a much larger conversation about planning.
All right.
Oh,
Um,
Anytime's fine by me.
okay, so it's not specific to this, but the overall general concept of removing alleys in totality
Put
needs
on a
for
list.
discussion. Okay,
I think that will come into play in the Sherwood West planning process.
So as it applies to this, is the impervious surface requirement the same for the rear of the dwelling unit in the case where we have the approach to the garage?
I don't believe so. I believe, because I don't have the standard in front of me, but I believe it was
No.
very specific to the front.
No, it's just the front.
Okay. Are we ready for cottage clusters?
Be ready.
Okay, so
Yes,
again-
I'm excited about cottage clusters.
oh, excellent. Again, cottage clusters are intended to consist of small homes at a lower price point, hopefully. And then the OAR, the minimum requirements that it has to have to be considered a cluster, 4 dwellings per buildable acre, and at least 8 dwellings per cottage cluster itself. And the OAR is very specific where it says the maximum footprint is 900 square feet. So per cottage, but there's no maximum of floor area, which allows for multi-story cottages. What we are proposing is to meet the minimum requirement of 4 cottages per cottage cluster, regardless of the size. And then the Planning Commission also suggested, instead of the minimum of 8 dwellings per cottage cluster, to actually increase that. So no more than 12 dwellings are allowed to share a common courtyard. So, and typically, again, these cluster housing are typically around that common courtyard. So if someone was to develop a cottage cluster, but they wanted to do 2 of them side by side, they then could have a maximum of 24 units, because that's a 2 cottage cluster development.
So what is
what's
the-
the magic of the 2? Like, I mean, you could say a 3 cluster development could
Right.
convert this unit to 4 cluster development. Like, it seems like
Yes,
completely needless and extraneous language that means nothing.
it's just for your reference point on how we're multiplying.
So
So
it's not a code. It's not in the code.
it's not. I'm just relaying it so that that's understood in regards to
Okay.
someone can actually develop with more than just 1 cluster development. on
So
it.
it's not a proposed amendment, it's an example.
Right. Because the language in the code is no more than 12 dwellings are allowed to share a single common courtyard. All right. The standards, again, are applied to clusters on 1 lot. Clusters, for clarification, they are allowed in all residential zones that allows for detached single-family dwellings. Minimum lot area are the same as the minimum areas for the base zone.
So that is per the state law, the cottage clusters are allowed in all residential zones.
Yes, under the OAR. Yep. And the minimum lot areas are also consistent with the OAR. If the development community wanted to put these cottages on separate lots, like fee simple, originally staff was proposing this to go through a planning
No.
development, and the Planning Commission has basically said, why should they? So to make things easier, we added some language that if they do want to create lots, as far as fee simple, they can go through the condominium process. We, to touch base, we're not proposing any language right now based on Senate Bill 458, which is the Middle Housing Land Division. We are going to tackle that on in the near future in regards to how to implement that. But right now there is a clear and objective way for them to be fee simple, and that's through the condominium process.
Do I have a question for clarification, please? When you're saying the cottage cluster and then you've got the different lot sizes, a cluster could be up to 12 and 12 cottages could fit on the 7,000. No. Okay, that's where I need clarification on.
The cluster can be anywhere from 4 to 12. They're saying the minimum lot size to have a cottage cluster is 7,000 in any zone, but it doesn't mean you can get all 12. You can get the maximum on there. You can start with 4 and work your way up, depending if you meet all the other setback requirements and everything else.
Thank you.
The 4 to 12 is per acre, right?
No,
Yes.
4 to 12 is per lot or per cluster.
Yeah, this is just going to be a mess. So
Okay.
So
Oh,
now
yeah, I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying, Tim.
is it? So is it
The
per
way
acre?
the OAR code was, if you go back a slide, Joy, the way the OAR code is basically allowing you to have a cluster that would be essentially a 1/4 acre cottage each, which is kind of outside the point of what this is about.
Right. I'm actually worried about the other extreme because of, just to get on my soapbox for a second, I was really disappointed at that 900 square foot footprint limitation for a cottage cluster, because the whole point, in my mind, a major benefit of cottage clusters is it allows for single story housing, especially for our wiser aging people that are aging in the community, where they don't want stairs and going up and down. So I'm actually concerned about the opposite, where you end up basically with a whole row of multi-story buildings that are very close to each other with a common courtyard and a common parking lot. It kind of defeats the purpose in my mind of cottage clusters.
I think it defeats one purpose. I think you're right.
Yeah.
I think there probably needs, because I think there's going to be, in my mind, I envision scenarios like you described, but I also envision scenarios like you described as, where you would have, 2-story, small starter homes, if you will, for people who maybe don't have kids or whatever.
So
I can see both of those things being desirable, and you're right. The code really is only pushing us toward one.
Well, it's the code. It becomes indistinguishable from some of the other housing modes, with the exception of its common parking, and there's a little common area, right?
So I will say too that this is obviously new across the state, and I think everybody's frustrated from one extreme to another, perhaps. But and then we also through the council goals and through staff commitment, will be monitoring this and monitoring what's happening at the state level. So it very well may be that as people start actually developing these in accordance with even the model code or local jurisdictional standards, there might need to be tweaks at the state level or at the local level to kind of fix some of these. So I think you guys are raising, all very valid and great issues that might have to work themselves out over time. And so I just kind of want to put that out there, that this is not a one and done type of code. It's going to, I think that because of how quickly it was thrown together.
So in the scenario where someone builds a cottage cluster on a 5, 8, 10,000 square foot lot, everyone put your development hat on, and given the choice of that or townhomes or a 4-plex or a triplex, what would you build? Where's the money? Because that's the end of the day where this is at, is during the different development options. If somebody's going to come in here and wanted to build 3 or 4, let's say 4 units on one of these lots, where's the money? I was fully expecting to come back and said we're allowed to do the cottage clusters are allowed, and they want us to develop a cottage cluster zone.
That's something we've been talking about separately.
Right. So as what you're presented, I'll throw out my objections, but I hate it. And I would support changes as we get to other slides, but I'd want planning to kind of game plan. Okay, so what's a cottage cluster potentially look like on a 7 or a 10,000 square foot lot? I have no idea. And I don't think you have, I don't know if you have examples of if you can fit 4 on a 7,000 square foot lot, meeting the whatever code requirements. Do we?
You have some slides with some sample layouts, right?
Before we move on to that, I do have a little quick question here, and I feel like I asked this question at the planning commission meeting, but my fog of war has kicked in here. It feels to me like the OAR division rules say there must be at least 8 dwelling units per cluster, but then our first proposed amendment says minimum of 4 cottages per cluster. Those, it seems to be we would not be in compliance with Division 46.
So the minimum 4 cottages is the same bullet point as the first one, at least 4 dwellings per buildable acre.
But it's not. That's the.
So okay. So if ORS Division 46 says there must be at least 8 dwellings in a cottage cluster. So what size a lot do you need to put 8 cottages on a lot? I don't think you can do that on a 7,000 square foot lot.
Read the second bullet point of Division 46 and the first bullet point of our proposed amendments and tell me how those are not in direct conflict with each other.
So
Well, you have to have 2 acres.
No.
But forget point 1. Point 1 is irrelevant. Just look at point 2 versus the first bullet point below.
So if you have to have 8 dwellings in a cluster, so now go to the lot size for clusters.
Oh, I see what you're saying, Doug. You're talking about the first bullet.
Yeah.
point under Division
Can we-
46.
We're saying you can have 4.
Can we
The state
change
says you have to have
the
at least 8.
presentation, please, to the screen that says this lot size? Thank you. All right. So can you get 8 900 square foot footprints on a 7,000 square foot lot? It's impossible. So HDR, MDRH, MDRL, LDR, all impossible for a cottage cluster because you have to, right? Am I full of hot air?
8 times 900 is 7,200.
And you still have a 20-foot front and rear setback and a 5-foot side yard setback, and you still need congregate parking
And a common area.
in a common area. So then 10,000 square foot lot won't even work.
So Joy, can you verify that bullet is correct? Because that does seem that there must be a minimum of 8 dwelling units per the OAR, or 8 in a cluster. Can you look at the, are you frozen, Joy? She's frozen. I'm like, she's thinking really hard. There you are.
My apologies, everyone.
your presentation went
Wi-Fi
away.
is really bad.
No, don't worry about it, Joe. It's the guidance we're getting from the state's not great. So
I don't know if you heard that, Joy, but can you verify that bullet that said there must be a minimum, or there must be at least 8 dwelling units in a cottage cluster, that is actually what the OAR says and isn't a
You
typo?
just pull it up.
Yeah.
Pull it up. I have it printed, so.
Okay. I'll read it in here.
Fine. Take your time. Sorry.
It's all good. We like families.
I blame Doug.
It talks about the minimum lot size, about 7,000. Yes, for density, it says a large city may not apply density maximums to the development of cottage cluster. A cottage cluster development must meet a minimum density of at least 4 units per acre.
It's not the question.
That's a question. Does a cottage cluster must be at least 8 cottages?
The reason why I'm asking that is I'm thinking that there was somewhere a typo or a transposition or something like that. I just don't want you guys arguing over something that isn't a real valid issue. And
I
frankly,
spent an hour having the same conversation at planning commission, and I don't remember where we ended up.
and if that is in fact what the code says, then yeah, we need to, DLCD needs to.
And again, that in regards to, because there's definition where it's like cottage cluster development, where it says a development site with one or more cottage clusters. And so that second bullet, it's the development of the site with two or more clusters, meaning that we're saying that if there's two cluster developments, that's 24 units or 12 per.
That's not. So on this point, we'll have to defer to lawyers later. But
Right.
as it is presented, what the default is, what I would assume is that we would establish a cottage cluster zoning in which that's where cottage clusters would be, and it would make sense, it'd be thought out, blah, blah, blah. But unless,
We're not going to do that by June, so we have to do something in this code by June.
well, if you do what they're suggesting, none of them could ever be built. Great, it's following the stupid state law, but nothing would ever be built in clusters, even if they wanted to.
But we
Because you
want
can't
to.
fit 8 cottages, unless they get one of the very low density lots that I don't think there are any left that are undeveloped out off Murdoch.
I think that 8 is a mistake. I think that's wrong, but we need to look
Right.
at the code based on what Joey was just saying.
All right, so
I'm raising my hand
oh,
so I could get some voice here over the moon. But I just had a question. If we made a cottage cluster zone, don't we still have to allow them in single family residential
Yes,
according to this new thing?
yes.
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 We do, Kim, but what it would do is it would prevent someone from building triplexes or duplexes in that zone. Because HB 2001 only applies to single family detached zoning. So,
Oh, I see what you're saying.
yeah,
People, because in theory, whatever the law really says on, being able to put cottages on a 10,000 square foot lot, we'll figure that out.
Okay.
But we have as a future project, we could create a new zone type, namely cottage cluster zoning, and we could create, some creative opportunities for cottage clusters that, potentially.
Mayor, we can dig into this in more detail after this work session, but I think where the language is coming from about the 8, the OAR actually says that we must allow up to 8 cottages per common courtyard, not a minimum of.
Well, that's very different.
The minimum requirement is that we allow up to 8. We can't require them to be less than 8. But yes, that is kind of the opposite of.
Yeah, that's why I figured there was something somewhere that was getting the missed in translation. So we'll that's
So
all.
then the proposal of 4 to 12 seems workable then.
Except, is there rules around common courtyard, the size of minimum size of a common courtyard?
Yes.
So that,
Should we move on as far as my screen?
Your screen's not up right now.
No, I know. I'm gonna have to share because we lost it when I
heard up.
no worries.
Yeah, because she's going to go into talking about the courtyards.
right. So let me just start the PowerPoint. Maybe. Oh, great. It started. Let's just move forward. No one looks at their screen, please. So I'm just letting you know that there is a maximum height of 25 feet or 2 stories, and the setbacks are 10 feet all around. The requirements for off-street parking is one space per
So
unit, and
I don't agree with any of this.
So, and
Okay.
the height is just per model code. That doesn't have to be, we don't have to allow 2 stories, correct, Joy?
that is correct. And so I know that there was a question where can we require 1 story? Yes, you can definitely require 1 story building, but the unfortunate part about it is the OAR says the building itself can only have a building envelope of 900 square feet. So that's going to be a really small house.
There are 1,000 square foot, 900 square foot homes in this town.
True. But so the model code, again, did say It allowed a provision of 1,400 square feet averaging, and that includes taking, if the community wants a community building, that takes that in consideration as far as the square footage of that. And typical, like this example, usually it would be a 1.5 story building is what they usually build to get that averaging of 1,400 square feet.
Yeah. So far I hate everything for what it's worth.
Right. And this has more details in regards to the community building, that it's permitted if they want one. There needs to be some restrictions if they're saying that it's not habitable and it's just a gathering place. There needs to be some limitations in regards to stating that in the recording of that plot for that property. And we don't consider it as an accessory structure. Let's see here. I know I have like 9 minutes, and so these are the standards that you were asking in regards to common courtyards. It has to be at least 15 feet wide. There has 50% of the cottages needs to be oriented around it. Yeah, and connections as far as pedestrians.
And Joy, are these model code recommended standards or are these OAR
Yes.
required standards?
These are, again, model code.
Okay.
And we don't have cottage clusters as far as regulations in our code at this time. And so we were dependent on the model code as far as crafting these, but definitely they could be modified as directed. Tied to the parking, we're asking that they could be clustered up to 6 spaces. Oh, Councilor Young, you have your hand raised. I'm sorry, I missed you.
No, I just forgot to put it back down.
Okay, and also there's no parking or vehicle area within 20 foot from the street property line. It also talks about no parking within 10 feet of other property lines. Screening is required, and garages and carports are not abutting the common courtyard. So these are, again, guidelines that they suggested that we implement through the model code. But again, this can definitely be changed because it's not in the OAR. So that's all that I have in regards to cottage clusters.
So back up, Tim's got questions. And like I said, I don't like anything.
So I think we need to spend a lot of time here because I based on what I saw here, I mean, I can envision a development where they line up, a bunch of townhomes or, basically two-story buildings with small footprints, just boom, 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 with a garage on the back of each. How is that different from some of the other modes of housing we have out there in terms of the goals of cottage clusters? So I just think we make sure we spend a lot of time here and make sure we get this right.
And just a reminder, we don't have a ton of time. Whatever. If
We have all the time we want.
Well,
We control it. From a today's standpoint, yes, I know the calendar is a different thing.
Right. That's what, yeah. So my point is, yes, thank you. I was confused. My understanding is that we have to either adopt something by June or the model code applies. So we need to get something on the books by that time is my understanding. So just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah,
well, I appreciate that. I'm just concerned that a developer could manipulate this cottage cluster standard to do some things that we wouldn't like as a community.
So Jean's got her hand up. Great to have you part of the work session today.
And I'm sorry to interrupt your work session, but
It's
You can always interrupt.
we're going to, this was delivered to our house today for hearing on the 8th. And I hear the same questions that the Planning Commission was asking on this presentation being repeated by council. I don't believe that the slideshow was updated from the last time we saw it. So there's some work that was done that maybe isn't represented here. Joy, I don't know if you, but that being said, I have the same concerns, but I don't know how to address it when we're going to hearing on the 8th, except to say, can we ask for your what don't you like, and can you get it to us in writing so that we can discuss it on the 8th and then send it to you as a second work session on the 15th, so that on our continued hearing on the 22nd, we can finalize whatever. I mean, if we're going to do this on a running change, I don't know how else to get Mayor Mays and the councilors' questions or concerns addressed when we're going to hearing in 7 days.
So a few, from my perspective, a few quick ones, Gene, that you guys might have already talked about. No garages. If you have a garage, it will quickly become a part of the house. Carports, yes. Open parking, yes. Garages, no. It defeats the function and purpose of this type of zoning. Single story or some sort of regulation that says that there's got to be a mix, whatever that means, 50%. But then if you do a mix, then if someone buys it, if at some point they're able to buy it, they can't remodel it and add a second floor. Setbacks. Any adjustments to the setbacks where the setbacks grow on a lot I'm supportive of that. Any that changes the setbacks and makes the setbacks shrink, I'm opposed. Those are the biggies on my list, but I've got others. Because if developers come in, if we're focusing on folks that are new to the market, that need more affordable housing, then okay, it's 900. It needs to be a lot of 900 square foot homes, which can be fantastic. But if developers are allowed to do up to 1,400 square feet, every one of them will be 1,400 square feet. If they're allowed to do garages, they will build as many garages, which is awesome. But if they're able to own it, I know what it was like, young families, they will convert those garages into living spaces in most cases.
An example of that are those homes over near Cedar Creek behind the apartments where, they have those multi-story skinny lot homes that are around 1,500 square feet that are selling for $500,000. That's not affordable. So I think I just want to add, from my perspective, there is a premium, there is a need for single story housing out there. Not everyone can live in a house with stairs, especially, seniors or, kids are gone to school, they want to age in the community, they want a single story option. And that's becoming a premium in the whole region. And I want to make sure that we have something in our code that encourages developers to build that. Because if they have the option, to Keith's point, of building higher square footage in this situation, they're going to do it because they're going to make more money. So we have to encourage that somehow.
Doug, your hands up.
Yeah, I just thinking about this feedback, and maybe another way to look at this is to kind of talk about, like, the first wave of these is going to be an experiment, and we don't have to necessarily try to accommodate all possible eventual types of cottage clusters. So maybe we should say, what is the goal we're trying to accomplish? And I hear Tim saying, and I kind of agree with this, we want to accomplish single family, housing for, for people who can't navigate stairs anymore, or can't, or for whatever reason can't, and that can be had at a cheaper price point. And granted, that means they're going to be 900 square feet maximum. But if we say that's our goal, or we pick some other goal, and we work the code backwards to say, let's form the code around that narrow, specific focus for cottage clusters, then, 2, 3, 4, or 5 years down the road, we can always say, okay, we're seeing this pattern develop and we're meeting that need, but there's this other need in the cottage cluster landscape that, you know, isn't being met. Now we can maybe widen the code, right? So if we start with a narrow focus and work the code from there, maybe that's a different approach we can take. And
thanks, Doug. I appreciate that. And Renee, I'll call you in a second. The one I ultimately think and am supportive of a cottage cluster zone type, so that if that's allowed, you know, post all this malarkey that we have to do by the middle of this
Yeah.
year.
I'm just going to reply to that because I was the one who proposed that at a work session a few months back, and I am still 100,000,000% in favor of that. But we have to have this code separate from that anyway.
Yep.
So
Yep.
I think we need to,
Because the way we're envisioning, or at least a few of us are envisioning cottage clusters and supportive housing for older Sherwoodians and young individuals. I don't know how many people will build them. If it's just they have a 7,000 square foot lot, I don't know how many will build cottage clusters versus a triplex or just a single family detached. Whereas if we then in turn create a zoning for cottage clusters and do some cool stuff in that zone, then that's the only thing that can be built, and we'll definitely get some inventory of that.
Yep.
Renee?
Or a lot of PUD applications.
I was just going to add, I appreciate the thoughtfulness that you guys are putting into this. Something that I would suggest that we try to consider, and I don't know what it would look like, is maybe a cottage with a loft, not necessarily a full second floor, but maybe a loft. I'm thinking as small families buy into a cottage and then they have a child, they're going to quickly grow out of that. Or an older adult that buys into a cottage and has their grandkids or their family members over. So not necessarily a full second floor, but a loft might be something to consider.
It's a good idea.
Thanks, Renee.
I was thinking the same thing. Great minds.
Other initial thoughts from?
I'll just jump in.
Yeah.
Can we take kind of a general sense of the council of the thought that I had, kind of dovetailing off of Tim's idea with Renee's addition? Is that a general direction of what council wants to see coming out of cottage clusters in the first phase, at least?
That's what I envisioned when we've been talking about cottage clusters since I joined council 5 years ago. So that's kind of what I envisioned.
So we're talking single story with a possible loft targeted toward, you know, empty nesters or maybe young childless people or something to be at the lower price point. Is that?
And our seniors, don't forget our seniors.
Right.
Yeah, that's what I meant. I'm trying to say it without saying it. Which I don't know why.
Yeah, and I can't remember, look at the floor plans, but you know, floor plans can have preferably not requiring a staircase if there's a loft without need, you know, I don't know what development code, blah, 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 but staircases take up floor space. You might as well just have a hide a bed, couch, or whatever they're called. Almost. Just thinking out loud.
Well, I think I have some ideas I can take offline. Maybe Joy, Erica, maybe me, you, and Jean can get together and kind of hash out some thoughts on this that can make it back to the next planning commission work session. I know we've done that before with some success.
Yeah, that would be great. I could definitely set something up.
Cool.
Oh, okay. I only have a couple more slides. So
Yep.
just so that you guys know, we are going to require sufficient information or infrastructure verification for these types of developments, just to make sure that infrastructure can be and will be provided. So this is an example form that we are proposing that we will be executing, just so that we can make sure that their infrastructure needs can be satisfied, because I know that was a big concern. This is the transportation system plan amendment that we're proposing as far as the new public alley cross-section detail that we're planning on adopting or moving forward as far as proposing. Just again, alleys are already in the code. This just will help codify them. So,
So my 10 cents back to PC is street light. So we have a standard street light now with like similar to Old Town, but the whatever it's called.
yes, well, so this definitely does take in a pedestrian scale lighting.
I don't care personally. You're still having vehicles go down this thing.
So what is it that you're wanting, Mayor?
Same street light, the standard that we're having on new developments, which is, I can't remember what it's called, but it's not the nut bulb thing. It's the
Westbrook, I believe.
There we go. Thank you. Hoping someone would chime in and save me.
Yeah, what we'll have with this design, you're gonna have like moving vans and stuff like that, taking those poles lights out all the time, if it's only just under 12 feet off the ground.
So one of the concerns in regards to the lighting, as far as if it was the full scale street light that we would typically require, is that these street lights would, since they are in an alley, most likely will be reflected in existing bedrooms. That aspect of it, and making them pedestrian would lessen that impact. But I understand your wishes, so that
for new projects, the setbacks are all 20 feet from the alley to the back of any property, which is in theory closer than if it was in the front of the street, front of the house.
all right. So we will we will modify this exhibit to reflect the typical street light.
Awesome. At least that's my perspective. Thank you.
The perspective from the man who doesn't want alleys at all.
Amen, brother.
All right, and then
If we collectively lose the battle, at least modify it so that it's least painful or most functional or something. I don't know.
so since the last planning commission, we presented at the planning commission a different residential standard for a local street with that would have allowed parking on both sides, and we were making an effort to increase the paved width to 36 feet so that could be accommodated.
So just to be clear, so basically what was proposed was that 36-foot wide streets be a requirement that would have allowed parking on both sides. And that's the direction that we've been hearing and thinking, frankly, for the past year plus since this has gone on. So I just want to make sure it's not to allow, it's to require. Right. But Joy and Erica heard different stuff from DLCD.
Right. The DLCD, having had a deep conversation with them in regards to the standard, it was determined that that proposal could not meet the climate-friendly and equitable communities rulemaking standards.
Idiots.
That they're holding hearings on and adopting in May of this year.
And I'll chime in. I mean, and you can kind of, we're looking at it. We're frustrated. We're as frustrated as you are. We know it's, we know that they're restricting our ability to require off-street parking, and they're also, through this climate-friendly, equitable communities rulemaking, restricting our ability to require on-street parking. And we are open to any ideas.
I have 10 ways to fix it, but I'm not going to. I need to know what the letter of the law. So are they dictating the right of way that a city needs for a project to be able to effectively, allow people to walk, bike on these streets and all that good stuff as well? Are they, and to allow future proofing the road in case it has to become a different standard? So what, at this point from the state, they're just saying a 28-foot road surface. Is that it?
So the state is basically saying that the new rule will allow a 28-foot residential street and may include parking on both sides of the street. But that means that it would be a narrow street.
Right. So what else are they saying about the street standard? Is that is the extent of it going to be a 8-foot road potentially with parking on both sides if TVF&R changes their standards?
So my understanding is that it's not even just to allow, like, you cannot have, I mean, Erica and Joy, correct me if I'm wrong, because you're more in the weeds with this than I am, but that we won't be able to require a larger street.
I know, I understand that.
Okay.
That is not the question.
Then what's
and I will do it offline so that I can
Okay.
be more specific
Okay.
with Josh. You know, important, get whatever the minds in Salem have in draft form. They're potentially holding hearings on.
Yeah, and our frustration, and I hopefully it's coming through to you guys, is, and I've heard this from other people, other staff too, is we have this House Bill 2001, and then we also have this climate friendly equitable communities, and they're both meeting, they're both creating rules, they're both creating stuff, but they're not necessarily talking to one another either, and so it's frustrating. And I will plug, sorry, Joy, I'm sort of stealing your time. My understanding is that we do have a representative from DLCD that's going to be coming to speak with you guys. When is it, Keith?
15th, next meeting.
So you'll have an opportunity to give them your.
Tell them how much we like them.
I know.
Doesn't matter. We're all going to be gone in 5 years anyway, because everything, there's not going to be no local decisions left to make. We'll all just go home and the state will just do everything.
Yeah, I was going to bring up that meeting on the 15th as well. I told we need to make sure we invite Courtney Neron to that as well. Because we want her on our side navigating for this stuff. But we also, I want to make sure we're really prepared for that meeting too, so we can get our concerns across.
What this other group of people in Salem who are talking about this 28-foot road, having a hearing in May, when would that, I mean, like all this other stuff aside from the road, we have this July 1 deadline that we have to adopt, or the state standards go into effect. What is the deadline for cities to abide by this other bucket of trash, potential trash, proposed trash? Is it also, as soon as they pass it, it becomes law that we have to abide? Or do we have 6 months to fold it into our code, or a year to fold it into our code?
Erica, can you respond to that? You're on
Yeah,
mute. Okay. No, you're not.
I can.
You're good.
That's a great question. And I'm going to have to reach out to DLCD on that. Typically, after they pass legislation like this, they will give cities up to, 12 to 24 months to make those changes within their code.
Yep. So that's an important little nuance. So day one, we're doing 36. I would suggest we do 36-foot roads. And then when the day rolls around that we have to abide by whatever this other dimension is, then we abide by the new dimension. Just a thought. So don't rush to implement a change that we don't have to do yet if we don't want to do it yet. Just thinking out loud.
But we currently don't have the 36-foot requirement implemented either. So we could implement that. And then at some point in the future, if and when we're required to implement the new DLCD proposal, we could do it at the last moment.
Yeah, and I think we're in a better place to advocate with DLCD and our representatives in Salem for a different standard if we've already have the 36-foot standard in place. And for those that are maybe listening to this, 28 feet with cars parked on both sides is one lane of traffic, and it's just extremely unsafe for our kids. Just not, I don't want Sherwood to look like Southwest Portland or Southeast Portland in 20 years, because that's where we're headed with all these rules.
Anything else? Any other comments or questions or thoughts by anybody?
Joy, great job. I know this is tough because we've got all this
Frustration.
stuff coming from the state that is, slowly eroding all of our home rule, and they're not being smart about it. And you're sensing our frustration, but I just want you to know it's not with you. It's not with staff. It's not with Erica. It's Julia. It's just a lot of tough stuff to navigate. So I really appreciate all the hard work and everything you guys have done on this project so far. Thank you.
Well, we do appreciate it, and we fully understand the community's concern. So we will move forward as far as offline, especially with Councilor Scott, and move forward. And we'll have Planning Commission next week.
Awesome.
So just a fun fact, I was just looking at the commissioners on the DLCD board. Not a single person from a city. No one with city background on that board. Just pointing that out.
They're academics, so of course they know best.
Yeah.
All right, so I appreciate everyone's patience and working through this. Gene, thanks for joining us. And